Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our fourth webinar of our six-part series, Your Lending Strategy with Doxim APIs. My name is Naila Pejnigara, and I'm a Director of Marketing Programs here at Doxim and your host for today. I'm joined here today by Sean Connelly, our VP of Product Management at Doxim, who will deliver our presentation. Before I hand it off to Sean, I'd like to remind everyone that all attendees will be in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen, and if time permits, Sean will be happy to answer them. You will also receive an email link to the recording of the webinar in a couple of days, so please feel free to share with your colleagues who couldn't attend. So with that covered, I'll pass it off to Sean.
Thanks, Nyla. So thanks, guys, for joining. I know it's been a couple weeks since I've been on here. I had a vacation and a couple things in between, so it's been a good couple weeks. Hopefully you guys aren't too tired of my very interesting background here, as you can see behind me. But today I'm going to talk about a topic that I don't want to use the term as near and dear to my heart, but really interests me in terms of not just the technical side of what it does, but what it enables from the business and the growth side of what folks can do with technology, and specifically, obviously, today we're talking about lending technology. So, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the ecosystem for lending is continuously growing, and so you have fintech people coming in who are sometimes funding lending on their own, but they're sometimes using external institutions to fund or provision dollars. So a combination of those and solutions that are really just kind of like front-end ways of funneling prospective lending clients from a business-driven need for dollars and then connecting them up to a financial institution in some ways. And so these people are these companies or solutions or channels, I guess, are continually growing. There's more and more that come up every day and every day. And what I think it does to the credit union space specifically is it enables a couple things. So one, if you have the right technology, it enables a great way of enabling new channels. Two, if you can enable those channels in an efficient way and capture them and use that to funnel that off to marketing and the growth side of the organization, you can actually not just capture the specific lending requirements that these clients are coming in for, these prospective members are coming in for, but actually use that to grow the member base and the portfolio and the products through cross-selling, upselling, having really great conversations with those members. But what the challenge is getting from A to B becomes really complex. And so what we see today is, if any of you, I've I think shown an image like this in a couple webinars that I've done in the past, but really this is just to describe what the term that's at the top here is the landscape, or the landscape that you have within a business. And so you have typically a lot of disparate technology, not always technology, sometimes Word documents, Excel documents that you use to drive lending across all the channels that you support. And so not just from a technical aspect, but from a people aspect, this becomes extremely challenging. So you have staff all over the place, sometimes in the branch, sometimes in central services, sometimes in dedicated lending teams, sometimes MSRs, sometimes whatever you want to call them, people kind of all over the place trying to manage these different channels. So the technology becomes difficult to manage, or maybe not necessarily difficult in every means, but sometimes the requirements are vast to manage. Maybe not difficult, but there's a lot of need for people to be thrown at the process to manage them. And the technology, again, is very dispersed. Processes are very dispersed. The member experience and the staff experience, again, becomes very dispersed. So what some of those large challenges are, I did allude to them a little bit, and it becomes, so taking advantage of, one of the first slides I showed was all the logos of all of those, folks in the lending ecosystem or the lending landscape. It becomes difficult to actually bring those channels in because of the complexity of onboarding it into the business, onboarding a new channel, a new business stream. Are you using new technology? Do you have to train your staff? Or do you have another LOS? Does it integrate to the banking system? How are you managing contracts, legal documents, risk, reporting? So it becomes a very big challenge to actually get from A to B when you want to bring on a new channel or a new piece of technology or a new partner. And so what ends up happening frequently is processes become disjointed because you have a new piece of technology that's been onboarded, but all of the back end of how things connect, how it actually becomes part of the staff workflow, how that goes to maybe your lending admin or your central services becomes relatively disjointed and very manual. And so having a consistent service across the channels becomes, again, very labor intensive. You're throwing additional people and resources at it. And again, not having all of that data in one spot really makes it a challenge for that staff experience, for that member experience, for the risk reporting, the auditing, the access to the data, access to the applications. So scaling up to get from bringing on new channels to a point where it's actually fast for you to onboard new channels and new lending mechanisms into your ecosystem. That becomes, there's some real stumbling blocks to get from A to B. And so, this is a quote from a former executive at Apple. And really it just describes the fact that, and we see this a lot in lending, and this is really where lending is going, for anybody that's been in the space for 10, 15 years, it's gone from a very manual, extremely complex, very heavy, a lot of people, eyes on paper, eyes on data, looking at information, to making that exponentially more simplified, where for certain loans and lending amounts, you can almost get it at the click of a button. And so you're taking complex processes and making them simple so that the consumers don't really even know that there's all this complex processing with core integration and contracts and documents and repositories in the back end. And again, that's really, I think, where if any of you are looking at all the American Banker reports and that kind of stuff, there's a lot of stats around consumer facing experiences, both at onboarding and just general origination. They're up in the top, 1 or 2 of the kind of key complex problems that we're really the industry is really trying to make seamless and streamlined. And so the way that, we've talked through this, for quite a while now is really, the idea of platformification. I don't know if that's a real word. It's probably at least in the Urban Dictionary, if not in the normal dictionary now. But it's really the idea of having application services or applications that you can share components of across multiple pieces of technology, multiple business processes, and then actually to have multiple enterprise applications all working together to provide a quick and seamless experience to either the end user, being somebody at the credit union, or the end consumer, somebody who's going through things themselves. And so the concept again is really just how can we streamline the way that technology interacts with one another to make it easier for everybody. And so there is a lot of benefit in terms of going from A to B, from that disparate ecosystem, a lot of manual process, in some cases disjointed, where things get dropped off or things take exponentially longer than they need to go to this integrated platform approach. And I'm going to be talking to a couple of these points specifically when I go through some of these use cases, but really it's about eliminating all of those, difficult to manage disparate processes and bringing them all together so that the user, whether it be, again, the person in the credit union or the consumer, doesn't know and doesn't really care that there's 3 or 4 or 5, in some cases, enterprise applications all working together. They might just be looking at one experience, but in the back end, there's a whole lot of wizardry or magic that's happening in terms of all the applications working together to facilitate that process. So I'm going to cover just a couple quick use cases. Some of these are probably examples that you folks would commonly run into, where having applications that talk to one another through technology, and we'll get into the APIs specifically a little bit later, but where the integration of the technology becomes great for consumers and great for internal stakeholders as well. And so one is around the issue, I guess you could call it, that the market has around abandoned applications. How do you recover them? Is the process on the front end too difficult? What happens on the back end? How can I make that more seamless and simple for a consumer? So there's a few stats on the screen. I'm not going to read through them all. They're more for you guys to look at. But really, the idea is that there's a lot of lost revenue, a lot of lost customer confidence or member confidence when they're going through these processes, because sometimes they get dropped, sometimes they're made to appear to seem to be a lot more seamless and fast than they actually end up being. So then the consumer experience, they end up being let down. It becomes very tedious for the staff. And you have a lot of business impact in that area, especially for your digital first customers or members that are really trying to self-serve on their own through these digital channels. So when we talk about that from a process flow perspective, we use these hex objects sometimes to walk through a business process, but you can really think of these as being components of an origination tool. And so the use case here is, again, consumers online, they're trying to either become a member or get a new product. This member, for some reason, abandons the application. So they're going through this process where they're keying information in, they're getting their ID validated. They may or may not be going through the document application process. And at some point they abandon. And so what ends up happening in a lot of instances, and I don't have a graphic to show this or walk through this, is this ends up being a very disparate process to how somebody actually picks up and manages that abandoned application and gets it into the finished or end state that it should be in. So being able to pick it up, finish the conversation, maybe take some notes, maybe manually adjudicate something, and then push it to the banking system. And so the idea is, if it's all within one platform, anything that starts on the digital channel, regardless of how far it went, so maybe it went end to end, or in this case, it's partially abandoned, somebody from the institution can actually come in branch and pull up that same app and finish it within the same tool that they would use to process applications manually. So again, the process for the consumer is managed much more seamlessly and much faster, because it's all goes from channel to channel exponentially quicker. So the in-branch channel that might be responsible for watching for and following up on these abandoned applications has quick and immediate access to them, and they use it all in the same tool that they would be using day to day to do anything else in terms of their origination. So they can come in, they can do the final fulfillment, and then actually push anything to the banking system the same way they would on a completely staff-assisted face-to-face process. So again, within the same tool, same architecture, but going from really channel to channel, so that multi-channel business process. So there's no, somebody starts something online, it abandons, it goes to another form, somebody has to come in, look at it, but then they have to manually key that into an LOS or directly into the banking system. So eliminating all of that, manual user intervention in terms of rekeying or manually keying information. So that's one, I would say, one of the most typical or prevalent use cases for having technology that talks to one another. The digital use case is huge today. It's probably one of the biggest ones that's top of mind for everybody. And a big piece is, how do those flow through, and then how do they get managed when the happy path isn't actually met? And so again, that's a little bit about that specific one. Another one, which is, I think we've had a few customers that have done this with some of our legacy tools, but being able to have all of this again in one system is critical. in terms of scaling and managing and bringing on these channels. So the second one I wanted to briefly touch on was, you could call it broker networks or really any external lending network. And so the idea is, can we get lending data from another channel into our system? And so, most lending apps, regardless of where they come from and what they're for, generally have the same type of data. So you have who's the member, who's the applicant, what's the product that they want, is it something that has security, yes or no, are there contract documents that need to go to that, go alongside that. And those are at a high level, and you could tie in financials in there as well, but at a high level, those are the key data elements that need to be captured. And so as long as a system can handle bringing those in, we should be able to layer a lot of these other channels on top. So again, broker network just being another one of those. We have experience with a couple different ways of doing that as well. But again, it's the idea of leveraging the same kinds of components, so all of the typical origination components, to handle that use case. And so again, these are very similar components that were on the last hex diagram, but a different subset of them might be used depending on the complexity of the application. So if you can think of, I was talking about, every app has applicants, financials, security, not everyone, but those are the main components. And so if the system can handle just dispersing them and using them across the channels, the exact same pieces of technology can be used and exposed out and shared across these business processes. So, somebody might start in, let's just say, the Filogix broker channel or any of the broker networks. And ideally, it again comes right in to the same system to be managed and picked up very similarly to an abandoned online application. Somebody just comes into the LOS, they can see that applications from the broker network came through, and they can come in and actually manage that process from channel to channel in an efficient way. So again, not having that dispersed across multiple pieces of technology, not sharing manual documents like, oh, here's your broker deal, and it's actually a PDF that you have to completely manually key into the LOS and then potentially into the banking system. But how can you eliminate a lot of the manual effort that goes in? Another one that's coming up, we're starting to get into business lending. Another one that's we're hearing a lot about is microloans or smaller loans for small businesses. So a small business has a specific need. They need to buy maybe some inventory or a vehicle. And again, though the constructs needed for that are who's the person or the business, what do they want to buy? Maybe it's a construction vehicle, and then they want some kind of loan or lending product associated to that. So again, the constructs that are needed are very similar. So you have the people, the products, the financials, the security, the contracts. Again, so all of those can really be streamlined and exposed out within a single piece of technology. So enabling, again, through a central service, being able to do abandoned online applications, provide a seamless broker network interface from broker channel right into the institution, allow for tools either you build yourselves or other fintechs to come into your LOS to enable microloans for either consumers or small businesses. So again, trying really conceptually to say, guys, we don't need 6 LOS systems effectively at our credit union. We don't need, one for digital, one for microloans, one for online, one for public website, digital banking, one for commercial lending, one for accounts and loans. And this becomes, really kind of the plight that everybody's dealing with now. It's why should we not just bring everything into one, build all of the APIs so that all the tech can talk to it, and then manage everything centrally in one place? And so really, that's where we are going, not just going, but we're actually in the process. I think when we did our first webinar of this series, we were just kicking off development. I think we were maybe a week away from starting development on our August release of the product, where we're heavily focused on the APIs. We are now a good run into that. So it's pretty exciting going from, hey, we're going to be doing this great API stuff and enabling these microservices and apps to actually starting to deliver on it. And so again, just to summarize, the idea is we can take applications from multiple channels, bring them into one system to have one connection into the core banking system, one set of adjudication rules, one place to manage contract documents, one place for all your staff, all your auditors, everywhere, every person to go when it comes to the concept of originating a product. So that all being enabled by the APIs and the microservices that we're building. And so I think I shared this last time as well, but just to cover it a little bit, we are, as I had mentioned, a good chunk of the way through this development. We've highlighted a couple of these in blue here, specifically towards the bottom, on the origination side. A big item for August is building a lot of those APIs out, predominantly around the digital or self-service origination use case. And then enabling more and more of those over time. And I don't mean time as in 2 years, I mean time as in release after release. More and more of these capabilities are going to be exposed. And so again, we're starting with members' deposit accounts. Very soon after, within months, working on loans, lines of credit, unsecured, mortgage pre-approvals. So all of those API capabilities being exposed before the end of the year. And then the biggest, most important part, I would say, around APIs and microservices is not just, hey, do I have an API? Because having an API doesn't really provide a lot of value in its own. It's how are you using that API and what are you actually enabling? So am I enabling a new channel? Am I bringing on a new partner? Am I enabling a new piece of technology to connect into the system? And so the second piece of this is we are actually, as of our August release, we're working with a partner now. We are, full headstrong into the integration today. We are building a new self-service portal for our product that's going to sit on top of the AOS and LOS portions of our platform. They are going to provide digital online end-to-end origination. Again, the first cut, as I had mentioned, is members and deposit accounts, fully end-to-end, completely vetted in terms of ID verification, social biometric analysis, phone OTP checks, real-time account funding through various different channels. Again, this is a big, I would say a big milestone for our organization is actually getting this to market. And so we're going to have the first version of it in August, and then the second version of it coming towards the end of the year that is going to have end-to-end loan lines of credit, and then starting to bring in, think of some levels of security. So the ability to do potentially auto loans, mortgage pre-approvals. So again, anything that you can tie a lending object to a security object. Just a couple reminders before I finish up here. So, we've talked about this a bit, the idea exchange that we've implemented. So we have right now 20 credit unions that are actually in that system. We have over 40 ideas that have been submitted are ready to be voted on. So that's pretty cool to see folks in there and actually using it and starting to take notes and suggest feature enhancements into the product. So if you have any questions about getting access to that, I think as we've mentioned in the past, that is going to be the mechanism that you guys all use to see and find out and help us prioritize what we're doing. And so our entire process around getting your feedback on what we do and why we do it and why it's important to you is all going to be managed within that tool. And so there's a few key dates that are here on the screen. So one, June 30th, there's a timeline to get your votes in before our round of prioritization begins for our December release, or end of 2020 release. And then from July 2nd to the 15th is when we're actually doing the formal prioritization. So to actually say, hey, these ideas are going to get allocated into our roadmap. And we think, that these, based on the feedback from our customers and the folks that are using the systems and actually inputting things into the tool, these are the most critical things that are actually going to come into the next release. Again, this is really about that, collaboration and transparency in what we're doing, why we're doing, and when we're doing it. This is, how you guys can all get involved. So again, pretty excited to see a bunch of folks engaging in that and actually starting to use that system. Last but not least, we have another webinar, as I'm sure you all know. It's a digital transformation customer fireside chat with Service Credit Union. So they've been using our CRM for a little while now, and they've got some great things that they want to talk about and share to all of you folks. So that was all that I wanted to cover. And I think we've got maybe a couple minutes to spare, or a couple minutes for questions. I can't see the question panel, but if Nyla or somebody can take a peek at that to see if there's anything, I'm more than happy to chat for a couple minutes here if anybody wants to see anything.
There's no questions right now, Sean.
Great. Well, wait. I think I'll wait on the line for a minute or two, and if there's anything, feel free to put a question in there or a comment, and we'll be more than happy to answer. Otherwise, everybody, thanks for your time. Appreciate it, and we'll see you guys next time.
Okay, Sean, I don't think there are any questions. We'll just like to thank everyone who joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about what was discussed today, please reach out. We'll be happy to help. As a reminder again, join us on July 15th for our 5th webinar, the Digital Transformation Customer Fireside Chat with Service Credit Union. Hope to see you then. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.